So in this video we're going to be creating MegaMan Slide mechanic, where you can slide through the scene and slide in between grounds, and it's also going to basically play that little dust cloud that happens when he starts a slide. Alright, so back to the project. If you didn't follow my original tutorial series on basically building out like a simple MegaMan engine, then you don't have any of these graphics or sprites or anything like that. And this is actually a basic scene that I created. It just has a bunch of ground box colliders, and it's basically this little brick pattern that sits as like the ground and everything like that. And I just built out this basic scene. So all the graphics and everything, the project, if you look in the description on this video, it's up on my GitHub. So you can go and download all those project files. So the first thing we need to do is actually get his slide sprite. So go into the graphics folder, and we're going to go to the player sprite, and we're going to hit the editor. So his slide sprite is actually this one right here that we're going to use. And you can name it whatever you want. You're just basically going to cut out his slide or whatever graphic that you're going to use. And we're going to, I changed his pivot location to basically kind of where his hip is, right here in the center-ish area. And so I also brought it up 2 pixels so it doesn't like hit at the bottom where his foot is. It's actually right up here, so he kind of goes a little into the ground with his foot here, so it's better looking anyway. So this is the sprite. So you're going to get that, and then you're going to need to create an animation. So you're going to create an animation. If you haven't done that before, you would basically right-click, create an animation. You're going to tie it to your animator, and then once you have your animation, then you're going to basically fill in the blank. So we're going to go to this player slide animation that I created. And then you would basically drop in your sprite. I set it to 1 sample because he doesn't have any animation in this. So it's just 1 sample and there's no looping or anything like that. And what I'm also going to do is I changed his box collider size and the offset. So if you actually take a look at this, let's just come over here and take a look. So this is his normal box collider when he's standing and running. But when you're looking at a slide, I have it basically set to kind of a little bit of a rectangle here. So it's kind of like at the top of his base here, right where his helmet is, and right here at the bottom. So that's the dimensions I used for his box collider. Now this little orange sphere here, this is where the dust cloud. So when he starts a slide and it plays that little dust cloud, this is where it's going to originate from. So this is kind of like the spawn position. So if we actually added that to the player, and those dimensions, that's negative 0.105 and 0.02 that I used. And it's basically just a little transform that I added onto the player. So then we're going to go and take a look at the code. So this is a trimmed down version of my player controller that I used from the series. I got rid of the shooting, I got rid of the throwing, I got rid of ladder climbing, having to do with switching weapons, and I basically shaved it down. So this is a standalone controller if you want to see how I did the jumping and the running around and everything like that. So what I added in here is a new bool called isSliding. So we need to know when we're sliding or not, and this is what's going to basically be that trigger. And then what I have down here is a slide time and a slide time length. So my sliding is time-based. So we need to capture when our slide starts, and then as it's sliding, we're going to keeping track of how long that slide is going for. Because after a certain amount of time, we're going to exit out of that slide. Or if we are in between grounds where we're sliding, we don't want to exit then, because then we're going to get stuck between the grounds when we go back into our idle. So we don't want that to happen. So we're going to keep track of the time, and so that's what these 2 variables are for. Now down here I have slide settings. This is the speed that I use. Now this value that I use is for, if you watch my series, I basically have a big version of MegaMan and I have a smaller version for like tile maps. So this is actually a value that I use for the big version because that was kind of the default for a 16:9 resolution. So you could actually, if you're using it for tile maps and a smaller scale, you can change that value to 1.6. I find that to be optimal. And slide duration, I do it at 0.35 seconds. Now down here under positions and prefabs, I basically add in a serialized for where that slide does position. And then we have a reference to our slide dust prefab. So that gets spawned as soon as the slide starts. Now down here in my player movement, I took out the ladder climbing code. So it starts with checking if we're climbing, but if not, if we're sliding. So this is actually basically where the slides code starts. But before we look at the sliding code, we're going to actually go down here to the normal code when he's running through the scene and jumping and doing and shooting and all of his normal stuff. So at the very bottom of this, I actually have a function in here where I call it start sliding. So this is where the sliding starts, and basically the check for being able to do sliding. So the sliding, basically, if you look at the way we're going to initiate sliding is we're going to hold down the down arrow and we're going to press jump. So when the down arrow is down, or the down arrow, when the down arrow is being pressed and we press jump and we're grounded and not already sliding, that's basically going to be the cue, okay, we can start sliding. However, before we check start sliding, we need to check and see that there's no ground in front of us, because we don't want to just start a slide and slide right into a ground, so that doesn't make sense. So what we do here, we have this function that we're going to add in that's called start or slide front collision. And so if there is no ground in front of us, then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, now we're going to start sliding. We're going to capture the slide time, basically the time that we started sliding. And if we had a previous slide, we're going to get rid of that previous slide time length, and we're going to play our slide animation that we created. And after we do that, then what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate a prefab of our slide dust, and then what we're going to position it where that transform is, down at the bottom of his hand in the slide animation. And the direction of the dust cloud, basically, it's assuming that he's sliding right. So if we're not sliding right, then we want to flip that so everything stays consistent with the orientation, which way he's sliding, and so the cloud looks right. Now down here, we're going to come back to that. Let's actually go take a look at the actual sliding loop. So in the slide loop, I have a bool here that's called exit slide. So there are certain conditions that'll have him exit the slide. Let's assume that he touches a ground in front of him, and that'll cause him to exit a slide. And you press jump while you're sliding, that'll cause him to exit a slide. If you change directions and you don't have ground above you, and you change directions while you're sliding, that's a condition that'll also cause them to exit a slide. So this is what that bool is. So it's kind of like a catch-all to say, okay, well, regardless of whatever other conditions are, let's just get out of the slide. And then we have these collision detection methods here. So we're going to see if we're touching ground above us and we're touching ground in front of us. So we're going to get those as bools and see what the results of those are. So then we're going to capture how long we've been sliding for. And then while we're sliding, we're going to check and see if the player is pressing left or pressing right. And if we happen to be pressing, if we're going right and press left, then what we're going to do is if we're facing right and we're touching a ground above us, then we want to flip. So we don't want to exit a slide while we have ground above us. We just want to change the direction. So if that's the case, we're going to change the direction. Otherwise, like I was saying before, that's a condition to exit if we don't have ground above us. So we're going to exit the slide, so we're going to set this to true. And down here is basically the opposite. So then this is where if we press jump and we don't have ground above us, so that's a condition to exit the slide. And then we're going to go talk about my jump coroutine that I had in the previous, I think I edited in video number 39. So we're going to see what change I made to that. So this is we're going to basically cause ourselves to jump, and we're going to exit the slide. And then down here, we're going to see if we have ground in front of us, but we don't have ground above us, and we're going to let it play a certain amount of length. So that's basically sliding into ground or into something that's in front of us. That's like got the ground set as a ground layer. That's a reason to exit the slide as well. And then down here, we're going to see if our slide time length is greater than the duration that we set, and we're not touching the top. So that's a reason to exit a slide. Or we're not grounded, say we slide off of a ledge. And one of those other conditions that basically caused exit slide to be true. So that's where we're going to say, okay, we're done sliding. But otherwise, we're sliding, so we want to apply the velocity to our slide. So we're going to take our slide speed and times it by 1 or -1, depending on which way we're facing, and then whatever our current y velocity is. So that is basically the slide code. So now we're going to take a look at my jump. So what I originally did is I had the velocity for the jumping up here in this main jump routine. Well, I've actually taken that out. I moved it down here into the coroutine. So there are certain times like that where we want to just do a jump regardless of whatever conditions we want to check to see if we can do that jump. So that's why I moved the velocity down to the coroutine. So I can just call the coroutine wherever just to make myself jump. But if I want to actually make sure that the jump key is pressed and I'm grounded, etc., then I can just call the regular jump method like I do in my update loop for the player movement. So then we're going to take a look at the collision checking. So in my ground check, I use a box cast, while in my front collision and my top collision, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an overlap box. So same principle, just a different way of applying it. So what we're going to do is we're going to be checking, we're going to create a box basically of these dimensions and then define its center. And this is for the front collision. And for the top collisions, it's basically the same principle. And to help better visualize, let's just go take a look at that, what it looks like. So these are the boxes. So this is the top box, this is the overlap box that gets created, and then this is the front box that checks to see if we're colliding with anything in front of us. So you're going to notice here that I have this little bit of a gap in between the front check and the top check, and I also have a gap between the bottom where basically my ground check is and the front check. I basically do have these little gaps so that it doesn't cause some sort of double, like a false positive, basically, where this is saying, oh, I'm on ground, or I got ground. No, you're not. You don't have ground. You only have ground if you have it in front of you, not if you have it like down here below you. And then same with this. So if this one happens to touch, we don't want this one also touching because we want to make sure that this one is distinct. So it's only checking to see if there's a top, and this one only if there's something in front. So if either of these trigger true, for instance, like this one, if it captures ground above us, then that's going to keep us in a slide when we're in between grounds. And then this one will basically, if we catch ground in front of us, then we want to exit out, if we don't have this above us. So back over into the code. So these are basically the dimensions I set up, and I got some offset stuff here that basically if you have sliding, that you don't want to push it out in front, you want to kind of keep it behind, etc. So you can check it out and see how I did this. I also have this function here called drawBox, which is basically just a debug thing, so you can see the boxes visually. So you don't really need that when you're in your final product. It just helps to see what's where the boxes are and everything. So if they're touching or not touching, you can kind of debug it and see what's going on. So now seeing it in action, if we come over here, we can basically hold down and press the jump key, and I'll basically have a slide. So it slides for a certain amount of time. And let's go take a look at one more thing. So over in my player controller, so I have those slide settings. So like I'm using this on roughly a tile map size scale. So I changed my slide speed to 1.6 and my slide duration is 0.35. So this is my slide test positions, basically this transform that I have here. I just basically drag it over onto my player and drop it there so we can access it, and my adjust prefab, which we'll create in a moment, which has to do with the actual slide dust. So back into here, so if we slide, we can slide, and now we slid into here, and we can go back and forth, right? So we can slide back and forth indefinitely, much like the MegaMan 3, which is what I was basically watching how they do it, and that's what I was trying to mimic. So I'm going to come out of there, so I exit my slide. I can come up here and slide. Now this one, I don't have enough room in front, so if I actually slide, it stops. It stops early because I collided with something in front of me. So I can hold down and press the space bar a bunch of times. I'm not sliding because I can't, because I got that collision in front of me that's basically saying, hey, you can't slide. So, but if I go up here, I can slide off. So that's the not grounded part. Slide off, slide in and out. So now we're going to take a look at one more part that has to do with the sliding. So if you follow my series, then you know about my how I do the damage. So we have a damage animation when he gets hit. So he plays his hit animation and then he starts flashing. Well, I had to make changes to the start damage animation and the stop. So we have to basically, if we get hit while we're in the middle of a slide, we're gonna play it. But if we exit out of that without basically, knowing that we're in a slide, we're gonna get stuck in between the platforms or the grounds. So what we're going to do here is I added in here, if we're not sliding, then we're going to process the original code that was part of the start damage animation. So this has to do with the hit force and doing the knockback. So, but if we are sliding, what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture the current rigid body constraints, and then I'm going to freeze. So when I get hit and I'm in the middle of a slide and I got a ground above me, it's basically going to, or it doesn't really matter whether I've got a ground behind, above me or not, but it's going to basically freeze all my constraints. So we're going to basically play our hit animation being frozen. And then at the end of the hit animation, we're going to do the stop damage animation. And then if we're sliding, we're going to go back into our slide animation and restore the constraints. So that's the change that has to do with the sliding. So let's go take a look at how that works. So back over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my slide. Now I tied my take damage since I don't have any enemies here to fiddle around with that. So I'm going to basically I tied the H key on my keyboard to apply damage like I'm taking a hit. So you can see I'm going to play my animation, my hit animation, I froze my constraints, I just stayed where I was, and then I go back into sliding. And then it'll play the coroutine for the flash damage. So, and then if I'm out, then I do my normal, you can see I kind of hopped up, so that's my apply force. So when I'm in here, there is no force. You're just going to play the animation staying exactly where you were when you got the hit, and then exit out. The last part of this is what we're going to do is we're going to add in that dust cloud that plays when we start our slide. So I have this basically this sprite sheet that I created. I had to snapshot from the MegaMan 3 to get what the dust cloud looked like and do some editing to clean it up and everything. So I figured out it's basically after stepping through some animations or some videos, it's pretty much just 3 frames that I noticed. So we're going to bring that in. So if you just get that dust cloud, bring it in, and then we're going to change the sprite mode to multiple, point no filter on the filter mode, and no compression. And what it looks like if we switch it to this is the first frame. It kind of looks like a skull a little bit, but this is the first frame, this is the second frame, and then this is the third frame. These are basically 8x8 sprites. And so you're just going to leave the pivot in the center, which is fine. And this is basically the orientation if he's sliding right. So if that's what I was showing before with the rotate, it'll flip this around the other way if he's traveling the opposite direction. So we're going to take these 3 these 3 sprites here, and we're going to cut those out. And so now we have our sprites for our dust cloud. So we're going to exit out of that. Next thing we would need to do is create the animation for it. So we would basically right-click, create a new animator. I call it slide dust, and then you right-click, create a new slide animation, or new animation, call it whatever. I just call it the same name, slide dust. And then if you actually go in here, all this is just the one animation tied to it. So then if we go and look at it, which we're going to have to do it from the prefab. Let's come over here, bring this over. So there's only 3 frames to this, and I put it at an 8 sample rate, and there's no loop time, so you don't want to check that. And that's basically when you go to the animation. There's this checkbox here. And on this animation, you're also going to see since we have the 3 frames and it's 8 sample rate, this is the length of the animation. So it's particular to note that. So this is 0.375, or 0.375. So we have these frames, which this, and if we step it, so the other one was the first frame, second frame, third frame, and then it should basically disappear. So how are we going to do that? So we got a prefab out of this, we attach it to a game object, we got this animation. So here's the game object, call it slide dust. Let's add in an animator, a sprite renderer, and the script. I also set the order in the layer to 11 because I have MegaMan on 10, so I have the dust cloud actually pop up above his hand. And since he goes fast out of it, it's only his hand's only underneath of it for like a second or a split second or whatever anyway. So we tie in the script. So we play this animation and it needs to disappear. So created a script, very simple script. It's called slide.script. And inside the start, all we do is destroy the game object. And we're going to do it at the end of that length that animation says, so 0.375. So when this starts, it's basically going to destroy itself right after the animation is done at that time. So we go back over here, we play this again. So you can see, you can't really tell, it's kind of small. But if you look, when his hand comes down, it plays that dust cloud, and then the dust cloud will basically destroy itself after the end of the time of the animation. You can put whatever time you want, but that's the time that we use, is just the length of the animation. So it just disappears right away after it's done. So that's how I do the dust cloud. So it basically instantiates a copy of that dust cloud every time he he starts a slide, and it basically plays itself out and then destroys itself and removes itself from the scene. So anyway, that brings us to the end of the video. That's my take on how to make the slide mechanic in MegaMan. Version 3, that is. I'm not sure if it's changed much in the other versions, but that's the one that I basically modeled this one after. So all the source code is up on GitHub. Check the link in the description. If you haven't followed my series, you can actually go into the you can check my channel. It's actually, there should be a playlist in there so you can watch all the videos. Series ended. Last one was number 40. Anyway, that's where most of this code comes from, except for the slide mechanic. And I didn't integrate that into there because that's not part of MegaMan 1, which is what I modeled the series after. So have a good day. If you have any questions, you can always join my Discord server and ask, and I'll catch you later. Bye.